I'm, I'm, I'm going to be a little light considering it's after lunch. I'm going to talk about something which really interests me and I dedicate a lot of time in it, as you'll see later, which is psychiatry and the media. What I'll do sort of a general approach. First, I'll discuss if media has an impact on mental health. Then we talk a little how psychiatry is portrayed in the media. Then I talk about my personal experience and some lessons I learned from it. And in the end, I'll give some hints to those who would be a little inspired and dedicated to be involved in media. And I'll give some hints how to do that. Anton Clare is a psychiatrist. He left us. He's not with us anymore. But for me, he's the epitome of how a psychiatrist involved in the media should be. Unfortunately, I talked to him only once in my life, and it was thanks to Robin. Many of the good things in my life are thanks to Robin, and one of them is talking to Anton Clare, which really inspires me. And I just wish to show a real media psychiatrist, not like me, but anyway, I dedicate this to him. First of all, I wish to say, does media has an impact on mental health? Literature research is very difficult to provide data on this. I found very little studies, but there were two which were particularly interesting, which I'm going to share. Not really about the detail of the methodology, etc., but to make a point that media has a big impact on our mental health. First of all, is a study which was done on if there are volumetric brain changes depending on how much a person watches TV. And this was both a cross-sectional and a longitudinal study. And what this study did, they studied around 130 boys and 140 girls. And they saw if there are any correlations between structural brain changes, mainly the ratio of gray to white matter in various regions, depending on how much time they spend watching TV. And not surprisingly, the length of a person that spends watching television, resulted in structural brain changes. In a way, this is no-brainer because whatever happens in our brain has brain changes. But this shows that changes can be so great that they can be picked up in structural imaging. And mainly, in a nutshell, changes were mainly in the frontal area, according to the longitudinal study. And according to the cross-sectional study, there were also changes in the visual cortex. Another interesting study, which I wish to share, is if how we perceive health, not mental health in general, how we perceive health, if it's influenced by what is happening in the media. And this was quite an intelligent study. They studied a number of medical students, and they gave them, psychology students, later medical students, I'll say why, a number of psychology students, and they gave them a list of 10 infectious diseases. This was pre-COVID, otherwise COVID would have featured for sure. And they asked them to classify how much an infection is severe. And they found that the medical students classified the severity of the diseases, the psychology students classified the severity of the diseases not according how to severe they were, but how frequently they featured in media. The more an illness featured in media, it was perceived to be more severe. One problem of this study, they were saying that psychology students didn't really know about illnesses, so it was biased. So they did the same with medical students. And surprisingly, the results with medical students were the same. Those illnesses, not necessarily the more severe, but featured a lot in media during that time, were considered as more severe. So, as you see, the more time you watch TV, the more you have changes in your brain, and it also influences the way how you think media in general. Last week, I did a small, not study, something myself. I have quite a popular Facebook page, and I wrote, next week I'm going to be in Palermo, I'm going to speak on media, and I put a photo of Robin and Marta to make it sound great, what I'm going to do, and told them if anyone has experiences about if media influenced him, please share these experiences. And I received around 40 stories, and two struck me particularly. One was, there was an incident 2 years ago. It was quite a lot in the media because of someone quite well known in Malta. Had his son died. They were in a construction site, and his son unfortunately fell and died in the presence of his father. And this father wrote to me and told me, I have never seen a psychiatrist, but each time in the media there is something about an accident, I relive that experience. In fact, he has stopped watching news mainly. And another story was someone who told me once I was contemplating suicide, and there was a TV program. It had nothing to do with psychology and mental health, but it had a good feeling to it, this program. And at that point, I did not do the suicide, and then eventually. So again, these are not only research, these are stories, real stories, which make this point. Now, when we're talking about media, I was talking on radio and TV, that's what I was mentioning, newspapers. But we must not forget social media, which is what is becoming very, very prominent. And social media has changed completely how we relate to media. Up to a couple of years ago, we were passive receivers. Nowadays, there is a two-way communication, and everyone is not only a receiver in media, but also a performer in media. Each time we throw a Twitter post, a Facebook post, a LinkedIn post, we are like transmitting, like if someone is transmitting from a TV station or something. And it's making this very interesting because nowadays it's a total two-way communication. And even if someone, prominent persons that have a post written on them or something, they say how many likes they had. So it's not only interaction, qualitative interaction, even it's quantitative interaction. This has its advantages, obviously, because more people have more access to information, and that's what media is all about, information. So there is more access to information, people have more visibility, etc. But also it's causing certain problems. Because one, it's providing an unreal perception of what life is. So if you go to my Facebook page, for example, You will not see me crying. You'll not see me when I am sad. You'll see me when I present at a conference or when I had a TV program. So if someone has the impression of what our life is from my page, he thinks that life is all great, everything is positive, and nobody has problems. And so it's giving an artificial, unrealistic way of what life is. And in fact, there are a lot of studies which show that depressions, especially in young females, have increased because of social media. But I don't think everything is negative only or positive only. And because of my interest in media, I did a study on the impact of social media during COVID times. And what we did what's called a sentiment analysis model. We analyzed, now we used Facebook because in Malta, the most popular social media is Facebook. It has around 70% use, although Instagram now is increasing a lot, but Facebook is still the main thing. And we analyzed both qualitative and quantitative input of Facebook during COVID. We analyzed the kinds of comments that were given, and we also analyzed the number of likes. And not only likes, because nowadays you can do a heart, a happy face, an angry face, etc. So we analyzed the quality of the response that there was. And basically we analyzed 50,000 comments and 150,000 interactions, likes. And what we found was that, first of all, during COVID times, the rate of use by Facebook was 100% more than usual. But what is most interesting is that there was significant correlation between online use and the number of COVID positive cases. 4 years ago, luckily we are all forgetting that time. It seems like ages ago, but it's just 4 years ago. We were all locked down, exactly May 4 years ago. And during that lockdown, and everywhere they used to be in the news, today there were so many positive cases, today there were so many positive cases. And we found that in Malta, with increase in number of positive cases, there was increased in interaction on Facebook, and with decrease of cases, although it was still locked down. So it was not that people were going out. People were still at home. There was decrease in response. And I think that's because people were using the social media as a way of communicating and interacting while they were afraid at home. And in fact, the posts were, as I said, we analyzed the qualitative, what people were writing at, what kind of clicks they made. And the more there were positive COVID cases, the more there were positive COVID cases, the more there was a sense of comments, of care, and affection. So people were using this way of social media as a way how to transmit and receive care. And that, at least, and this is it graphically, at least it showed that although we speak very negatively on what social media can do, if it's used well and wisely, it also has a positive, it can have a positive effect.
Anton,
yep.
Could I just ask you a question? You were saying, I was wondering how the starting of the availability of the vaccine change the tone of the messaging? I mean, you were saying that when cases increased, there were lots of interaction and they were generally positive. I was wondering if the debate on the vaccine did change the tone of those interactions.
Unfortunately, we didn't study
didn't have-
that.
okay.
It would have been very interesting. This was before the vaccine. But at the point we were so busy with clinical cases that anyway. But it would have been very interesting. Now, how is psychiatry portrayed in the media? Unfortunately, very unfortunately, we're not seen in a very good light. I'm sure many of you have seen this kind of pictures, and this is how psychiatrists are usually portrayed. In fact, something which is funny and not funny is many times when I introduce myself and even in TV programs, they tell you, but you look normal. I'm not Richard Gere, but I'm not. But this is how people tend to see psychiatrists, unfortunately. But then, although that's how we are portrayed, if used wisely, media can have a very positive impact of how people perceive what psychiatry really is, and leads to positive acceptance. And in this paper, they have written that the exposure of media, if there is a lot of good exposure of what psychiatry is, what mental health really is, it helps to decrease the taboo, because there is a lot of taboo about the subject. It shows treatment options, because when we speak of psychiatry, the idea out there is that you receive a bucket full of medications and that's it. Many people don't see that psychiatry treatment is multifaceted and there are a lot of ways of giving treatment, not only medication. And what's also very important, if certain characters in films or real people are shown as an example. And in Malta, over these last years, I've been working very hard on these lines. And one of the things which has helped a lot is this person. This was the Minister of Health a couple of years ago. And he suffers from bipolar disorder. And he decided to tell his story. He accompanied me in several TV programs. Although he's not in politics anymore, as a joke, I tell him, at last you're cured now. You've decided to forget politics. Because it's very toxic, politics. By him talking a lot about his story has helped a lot. And we have patients who tell us, his name is Mario Gallia, tell us, I am like Mario Gallia, can you help me? So it has really helped. Also, I was still involved in several media-related activities. I started by having a radio program. It was called Maltese Mill-Entital Psychiatry, which means looking through the lens from the side of a psychiatrist. And people used to phone about everything, not only about mental illness only, because the whole idea is to normalize sort of psychiatry. And they used to ask me about something, and I'll discuss it on air with them, but I'll be speaking as a psychiatrist. I will not answer with my personal opinion or what I think, but in that case, if there was, for example, there wasn't still a big boom in buildings in Malta. And then I would discuss how urbanicity can increase mental illness, etc. I will talk how psychiatry can increase into the debate around that subject. So the idea was that people would see how psychiatry can help in general, not in terms of treatment as well. Then we had a documentary series. It was called Al-Layl Al-Tayyib, which means good night, basically, have a good night. And it was aired at 9:30 in the evening, and it was there. I wasn't a psychiatrist. There, I was a scientist. That's how I was being introduced. And the whole idea was to show that psychiatry is based on science. And there would be a subject, and I would be asked about that subject, and I say what science says about that subject. The whole concept was that people would see a psychiatrist as being a scientist as well. And luckily we did very well, and in like every country in Malta, there are the awards of TV programs, theater, etc. And it had won the TV program of the year during that year that it was translated. Then we had a series called Insirun Nafu Will. I'm saying that the title obviously is in Maltese, which means let's get to know someone. And it consisted that I would interview quite prominent people. There was the president of Malta, TV personalities, authors. I will interview them. Then another person would interview someone who knew them really well. And then I'll gather that information. Afterwards, I'll discuss what I think had helped them to be successful. And the idea was like a psychiatric interview. I was telling people, this is how a psychiatric interview usually is. I talk to a person, we get information from someone else, and together we do conclusions. Again, this was all to remove the stigma around psychiatry. I am very frequently, for example, in the news, I'm interviewed around once every month. I'm very much into programs as a guest. And something which I have been doing for 12 years is that every Thursday at 6 o'clock, there is a TV magazine program, and I am guest for half an hour in that program. And what we do is there I speak about mental illness only. The other programs I said how I wanted to decrease the stigma. This is teaching on mental illness, literally teaching. And people would send questions generally on our Facebook page in private or send an emails, and then I'll discuss. Now someone will tell me I have a child who is being hyperactive, school don't want him in the class, and I'll speak about ADHD, for example. For some times we did phone-ins, but they can be the last phone-in I had, and I told them stop them for some time because the producers really like the phone-ins. But I had a person who phoned me, a lady who was telling me about that she has bipolar, no one wants to understand her, and I felt that there is something done. Then eventually it realized she was phoning illegally from prison, that person. And the things she was saying were quite tricky. So when people phone in, it's quite tricky, so I don't do it frequently. I prefer that they write questions and I answer them. But one has to balance because there are certain things the producers say it's good for TV, and the phone-ins are like that. Luckily, this is quite a popular spot. In fact, this is the news, the journal of our university. And usually when I publish a paper or something, it's news. But this is one of the news that I am most happy with, because the slot repeatedly, they do broadcasting surveys. The slot repeatedly is the most followed up slot in Malta during whole week from the whole stations. So it's a very... Yeah, but I was going to say, before 8 o'clock. Football is after 8 o'clock. I wish, but it's not me. It shows how people really wish to learn about mental illness and about their condition. We had other initiatives. As I said, social media is the new thing. And we had, for example, did a campaign called #StopStigma on social media. And we have several Facebook and Twitter pages that we use. This is called kallimni.com. Kallimni in Maltese, talk to me, which is talktome.com. And where people, on the other line, there are psychologists, and people can write to them and answer them there and then. Just to give some tips about how best to portray mental illness and psychiatry in media. I'm going to give hints that were given by mind, not by myself. First of all, think when you're talking on media, you need to be very careful what language to use. A lot of language carries stigma and weight. So one needs to be careful. For example, you don't say he was committed to hospital, because the word committed gives the idea that as if you're sending someone to prison. Yeah. So when you talk on media about these things, you really need to use appropriate language, and language that is understood by people. You don't say, for example, this must be anhedonia, because no one... Yeah. So you need to use... I think which helped me a lot. My mother is a teacher, so she has good education. But I always say, is my mother understanding me at the back of my mind? If she is understanding me, then I'm doing quite all right. That's how I look at it. Be very, very careful how to talk about suicide. And in media, although they invite you as a psychiatrist, their interest is not to promote mental health, but to have viewers. That's the bottom line of whoever does a TV radio program, etc. And suicide brings a lot of intense emotion. So it crops up quite easily. First of all, never talk about particular cases. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a program, and the host started to talk about a case, a particular case. And I told him, stop, I don't want to talk about it. And he told me, no, because that way you are increasing stigma. I told him, no, I'll tell you, I don't want to talk about it. And it is, one, you'll have the relatives listening, which is unfair. But most important is that it can lead to copycat. Research shows that by talking on individual cases can lead to copycat cases. Having said that, it's important to talk about suicide in general terms. And whenever you mention suicide, first you need to start, if you need help, these are the numbers to contact, these are the places to go to. Always mention that when you're talking about suicide. And then talk about suicide in general, that it is part of mental illness, treating mental illness, prevent suicide, etc. So it's good to talk about suicide in general, but not about individual cases. Also remember that people's experience on mental health are different. So don't be too dogmatic. For example, don't say the death of a loved one will lead to depression. I'm inventing an example now. Don't be, because everyone has his story, everyone has his journey. And people need to relate. And they relate by feeling that you're talking about something that can be part of their life. So don't be too dogmatic, because as we all know, mental illness, there are many causes of mental illness, there are many situations, so always give examples and speak in general terms, not dogmatic. And don't oversimplify the causes of mental illness. Don't say, for example, last week I was in a program and the host told me exams result, because now is the time of exams, said exams result in depression. I told him, no, moment, not exams. Stress can cause depression. Not everyone has the same resilience. And at the end I said exams could be one of these. So don't oversimplify, although it looks great. And it's good to be, don't oversimplify. And remember that resilience is complex. When we speak about resilience, and it's important to speak about resilience, it's important to show that there are many different ways of resilience, and each of us has his or her way of coping up with it. And this is very important. Don't be too positive or too optimistic, because that's not realistic. One needs to be realistic. And don't say, for example, we cure all cases of schizophrenia. To give you an example. Because one, it's not credible. And two, you really need to get a real message out there. Sometimes people feel enthusiastic, they want everyone to get treatment, so they be too positive. One needs to be careful about it. And the last thing is about how to use social media, because I said social media is as important, if not more, than the traditional media. Although there is a lot of integration. For example, when someone is giving an interview on television, always one needs to keep in mind that a clip, a couple of minutes clip, would be used as a reel in social media. So when one speaks, he needs to do as I'm doing now, opening arguments, celebrating, etc. But you also need to give short statements, which then can be put individually in social media's reels. So there is a lot of integration between them. But when in social media, more so, always tell a story. There is a lot of noise in social media. If you go to any platform, the input would change all the time. So you really need to get attention. And the best way to get attention, especially in the type of message which we want to do, is to start with a story and use different media platforms. It's the way how I look at it is as if you have different TV stations and you're transmitting from all of them. So if you post something, put it on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, but it's very important to be consistent. Since the audience is very little, some people tend to say something on Instagram, but say something quite different on Facebook. It doesn't work that way. You need to be consistent all through the platforms, but make sure to use all the platforms. And stress what's called the so what. It's not just giving information, so what? Why are you doing it? And if you offer exclusives, because as I said in social media, all the idea is to try to get the attention. If someone is watching a TV program, he's watching that program. You are there. if you're in social media, people are scrolling, watching reels, so we really need to get their attention. So offer stories and as much as possible with exclusives. Are we successful in trying to use media to help mental health? Because that's the bottom line. The feedback I get is yet, but it's feedback. I think we need to evaluate this scientifically one day. It's very difficult to focus and to assess, but I think that should be the next step, because then we can learn we audit ourselves so that we can learn how to be more effective. Thank you for your attention. Any questions?
Anton, thank you very much for this, because I was trying to think, and maybe Catherine, Anita, you can correct me. I don't think we have any program in UK where psychiatrists or a psychiatrist are permanent hosts. I think there is a paper, expert in the field get invited to comment on the paper, and then the discussion on mental health is mostly run, by either sometimes GPs. I mean, we talk about mental health. We don't talk about mental illness. There is the mental health, which actually, to be fair, many people with visibility, so from member of the royal family to people from the media world, have shared their experience. Oh, yes. And so it's very common, it's more common to have people, as we would say, with shared experience, being invited as permanent guests to talk about depression or whatever is the mental health condition that is discussed, rather than as a psychiatrist. And actually, in social media, often psychologists get a better reputation than us. We are associated with giving lots of medication and putting people in hospital. Okay. So I think the work you're doing in Malta is exceptional, and I think very powerful. And I wonder if in other parts of the world you have a similar role like the one that Anton has in Malta. What's happening in Australia? No. So you are shaking your head furiously, John. Who talks about mental health on telly or on the media in Australia?
There are many other Australian psychiatrists here, but I think Pat McGorry has a very fantastic profile, and someone like Ian Hickey has a podcast. And there may be other people that I don't know about. But with respect to Anton, your presentation, that's a great role where you're seen as normal and you can be a psychiatrist and have a good rating. So that we certainly.
And
in fact, that's how it all started. I wanted to normalize psychiatry. In Malta, it's a small country. It's 600,000 population. It's very difficult to go to see a psychiatrist, and I wanted to normalize that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how it all started.
Anita, do we have any child psychiatrists involved?
No.
Any regular sort of educational?
No, nothing regular. I mean, in fact, I think the voice of lived experience now, UK, which of course is very good in terms and our university prioritizing that. We had Alex George, who's a famed star in Love Island. I don't know it. Apparently, it's a reality TV show. So I kind of feel that things have changed a bit in the UK, as you say. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see where psychiatrists. We just proposed you, Marta, for the UK.
They won't understand my accent as a. But I, as I said, Anton, I think what you're doing is very important because, of course, hearing lived experience, and you said the power of stories, but then ultimately, if you develop a mental health problem, you come and see one of us. And if we are seen as somebody not to trust or to be wary of or not sure if they can engage with us, or we are portrayed as in some movies, I think that is a big barrier for people to... and I don't know if you see that in Malta, but particularly about young people, or particularly about people who feel, generally speaking, outsider in society, and maybe they have less familiarity with Western medicine and even less with Western psychiatry. So I mean, we at least in London where I work, my catchment area is very diverse in terms of cultural and ethnic background. And for some young people, what is a psychiatrist is a big mystery. And unfortunately, it's not a positive mystery. It's a sort of usually daunting mystery with lots of stigma.
And something which, as psychiatrists, we need to be very careful. We, as you said, we're portrayed as dishing medication.
Yes.
And we're not that. But we need to, first of all, not be that. But because unfortunately, there are some people who do that. But very importantly, we show that when we talk of treatment, I always say, when I say treatment, it doesn't mean medication. It means medication if needed, but it's psychology, social intervention, having friends, etc. It's very important that we portray that.
Actually, one thing I wanted to ask from your experience, this is almost a lived experience actually. So in King's in London, and I'm sure, Catherine, you have experiences as well, if we get contacted by, say, a mainstream media for an interview on a topic or on a paper, in theory, we should always inform our press office, and they like to be the one liaising with the TV or the media. They want to organize. So actually, Eduardo, who's here, knows I'm very happy to do that, but we were doing something about cannabis and psychosis, and we got approached by a group of young producers called Skunk Madness. Now, they didn't mean what I mean about that. They were mad about skunk rather than thinking that skunk. So they were the other side of the debate, and they actually wanted to talk to me and interview me because they disagreed with my view of cannabis and psychosis. And I thought it was brilliant. One, that they bothered to contact me. Two, that they gave credibility to any answer. These caused huge paranoia in the press, to a point that when they came, actually, Catherine, to our department to do the interview with me in my office, and I said to the rest of the team, Isabel was there as well, I said, you might want to talk to the rest of my team. Some of them are looking at the genetic of cannabis and psychosis. Some of them are interviewing patients. The press officer took all the junior staff aside and said, don't do that, this will ruin your career. You should not talk to these people because you don't know who they are, you don't know what they're going to put on social media. And my experience was of a wonderful exchange of opinion where I did hear that some of that, well, the guy who interviewed me had multiple sclerosis and he had been taking cannabis for several years under the medicinal sort of legal actually framework. And so he was bringing a very valuable experience that I don't always hear because normally I see people in my clinic with cannabis and psychosis who use cannabis recreationally. And I was a bit upset, and I don't know if it's the same with you in Malta, how controlling, I mean, the university was on the people you should talk and not talk about.
First of all, I do a distinction when I talk as head of the services and as a psychiatrist. When I talk as head of the services, I make sure I liaise with the communications people. As psychiatrist, I'm free.
You can talk what you want.
If they stop me, I resign because I have to be free. Something which I learned that if it's something recorded, I insist that I have to see it before it goes on air. Once I had not a nice experience because I was interviewed about something, and they asked me, let me remember how it was. They asked me, do you believe that someone can throw broken glasses out of his mouth? And I said, quite typically like me, oh, how can they? And I started laughing, and that was it. Then in a program down the line, a couple of months ago, there was a program on religious experiences. And one was saying that he was possessed by the devil, and he was throwing glasses out of his mouth. And then I came immediately afterward, and it seemed very disrespectful from me. Oh, laughing about him, and I was really angry about it. And from then on, I told them, if it's live, I have control. If it's something recorded, I have first to see it, otherwise I would not accept. And it's working out that way.
I think that's a very sensible compromise between being... Robin, you got your hand up.
I was going to just, on the same theme of bad experiences, has anybody threatened to sue you?
No, so far.
Because
So far.
one of the surprising things in my life is that 2 weeks ago, a Conservative member of Parliament threatened to sue me. And this was because we had had a debate on should cannabis be legalized. And in the middle of this, I said, well, there is a lot of money in the United States, the legal market for cannabis, $33 billion. And I said, this money is coming our way. For example, a Conservative member of Parliament was given £400,000 to campaign for the legalization of cannabis, which was a sort of shorthand. He was given the money to set up an organization to look objectively at the science. Well, I mean, the man who pays the piper calls the tune. But I didn't say that the one went to a campaigning organization, and he said that if I didn't say, so this is recorded and was available on video. So our institute said that I had to retract that sentence and not imply that he had pocketed the money. So it just struck me I didn't intend to say that he had taken the money, but you have to be very careful.
Yes, you have to be very careful.
But you have done all of this and nobody has threatened to sue you.
So far.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, you don't have Conservative MPs, that's why.
So does anybody have, shared lived experience of, ask any like, I'm joking.
I have a shared lived experience having practiced in Colorado when things got legalized, and that was I took my 13-year-old son to our beads store to get beads, and the man who usually sold beads was in a white coat and selling marijuana. So I took my 13-year-old to his first marijuana shop. And at that time, practicing in the States, if you dispense marijuana as a physician, it was okay in Colorado, but you could lose your federal license. So it was quite a conundrum, but I had a family member come to me with a proposal that I joints as an incentive program for her son who was in a treatment house, being treated for depression and living in this structured environment. So every time he did a task, I was supposed to give him a doobie to incentivize things. And then the man was going to give me an ounce of marijuana a month to dispense to my patients as I saw fit. But my question to you is actually based on my practice in New Zealand, and that is we see diagnoses of contagion. So tics, dissociative symptoms, et cetera, and I'm just wondering what you're seeing in Malta.
Sorry, they are contagious.
Yes. So you talk about a condition and it becomes very popular. Now half the population discovers that they didn't know they had it.
What I think has happened in Malta, there is a very strong lobby, a support group of patients of ADHD. And I think now in Malta it's overdiagnosed, everyone says he has ADHD. But this was, now it has settled down. That's what I think the only thing has happened.
Yes, I mean, I would agree with you. Things then settle down. I think it's the same across medicine. I mean, I remember when I was a medical student, you study pretty much any condition, and among students you begin to think, this happened to me, but then you forget, you move to the next part of the body or whatever, and you get preoccupied about it. So I think what you do is very valuable, and I think maybe in different countries we can think about how we can do it in a way that fits also the society we talk to and our audience. Thank you very much, Anton.
Thank you.